Welcome back to Blacklit Memory. Tonight, I bring you 8 stories pulled from deep cabins in the Appalachian, dark structures left to rot, but never truly empty. Some still held breath, others waited with their eyes closed. These aren't just campfire tales. These are warnings, wrapped in soot and splinters. If the floorboards groan and the fire won't die, you might not be alone. If you enjoy stories like these, do consider subscribing, and if something ever followed you home from the hills, I want to hear it. Now hush the world. We're going back inside. It was late March, wind-brittle and gray. When I signed the work order, my name's Ellis Vaughn, 32, and I do restoration carpentry, mostly the kind that brings me face to face with rot, termites, and the slow decay of forgotten things. This job was tucked up in Clay County, Kentucky. Not much of a cabin, really just 4 crooked walls and a sagging roof line pressed into the hillside like it had decided halfway through being built that it didn't want to be found. The land trust that owned it labeled the place a cultural artifact, which is code for we don't want to be sued if it falls on someone. I was contracted for 3 days, brace the beams, reseal the roof, and patch a wall that tree roots had pushed in from beneath. The first night, I slept in my truck, parked half facing the trees. It was cold and still. Coyotes called once and fell quiet, and stars burned sharp through the canopy. But it wasn't the quiet that kept me up, it was the wall. The rear one, facing north, looked off. Not newer, not mismatched, just too smooth. Well, the grain had faded like the rest of the wood, but something about it made the eye stop, like a polished stone on a gravel path. The second day, while hammering loose boards near the hearth, I caught something in my peripheral vision. A movement, subtle but definite, like the wall shifted inward, then relaxed. I froze, tools in hand. There was no wind that deep in the trees, no shifting light, no creaks. I told myself it was root pressure or shadows playing tricks. But when I stepped closer, nothing moved. The panel was cold to the touch, not freezing, just indifferent, like touching the side of a stone you thought was hollow. That night, I stayed inside the cabin, lit the gas lantern and sat on the edge of the cot, boots off, listening. Around midnight, I heard it. A brushing sound, soft, deliberate, like fingers dragging across old wood. One long stroke, then silence. It came again, closer this time. I stood slowly, flashlight in hand, and pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. But when I stepped back, I saw them 5 faint lines in the dust, drawn low on the paneling, like someone had dragged their hand from shoulder height to the floor. I wiped them away. Just dust, I told myself. Nothing more. The next morning, behind the old dresser, I found a photo, black and white, curled from age, wedged into a slit in the wall. It showed a family of 5 standing in front of what looked like this very cabin. Same roofline, same slope, but the back wall in the picture was blank. No paneling, no window. I flipped the photo, no names, no year, just a fingerprint on the back, smeared in something dark and dried like rust. That afternoon, I pried loose the panel where I'd seen the movement. It resisted not from rusted nails, but from pressure behind it, like the wood itself was being held in place. When it finally gave, the board came free cleanly. Its backside was smooth, save for a single white imprint in the shape of a hand, wrist to fingers. Not quite human. Not quite right. That night, I didn't sleep. The lantern sputtered out around 2, and as I reached for my flashlight, I saw it. An arm bone white, impossibly smooth, slipping through the wall. There was no break in the wood, no opening. It simply emerged, soundless, as if the timber were water. It didn't reach or claw. It just pointed long, straight, toward the dresser, toward the photograph I'd left face down hours earlier. Then it vanished, just gone. I stood there until morning. By morning, the wall looked normal again, no marks, no trace of what I'd seen. The only difference was the cold. It clung to the wood like frost, even though the air outside was warming. I checked my tools, moved slowly through the room, half waiting for something to flicker back into view. But nothing happened. The photograph was still on the dresser where I'd left it. Only now. The fingerprint on the back had smeared wider. I hadn't touched it, not since the night before. I walked the perimeter of the cabin twice. No footprints, no drag marks near the walls, no wildlife. Even the forest felt held, like it was watching without needing to move. I tried to focus on the work resetting part of the joist, sealing the roof line. But every board I nailed down felt like a futile gesture, like trying to patch a wound that wasn't really in the wood. The whole time, I kept glancing over my shoulder, not because I heard anything, but because the silence had changed. It wasn't absence, it was waiting. That night, I didn't light the lantern. I sat in the dark, back pressed to the opposite wall, flashlight in my lap, its beam off but ready. Hours passed. Then, near 3:00 a.m., I felt it again, pressure in the floorboards, slight but certain, a weight shifting somewhere behind the wall. This time, I didn't freeze. I spoke. Just one word. Why not loud? Just enough to break the quiet. There was no answer. But something scratched the paneling, just once. Not violent, more like writing. At dawn, I peeled up one of the floorboards near where the wall met the base. I don't know what I expected, a tunnel. Maybe, or a buried box. What I found was older than either. Behind the panel, packed into the wall cavity, were pages, dozens, handwritten, folded in layers, some stained, some torn. The same handwriting across every page, tight cursive that sloped downward like the writer's hand had grown weaker. Most were letters, never sent, addresses scrawled out and replaced, names scratched away. But all of them ended the same way, with a signature that matched the back of the photo, E. Vaughn. My name. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the sun to shift and the cold to pull back. I took the letters outside. I burned them. Every page. Watched the ink curl and blacken in silence. Then I packed my truck. I didn't finish the job. I left the boards loose, the sealant half used. The photo on the dresser turned face down again. I told the trust I was done. Told them the structure was too compromised to restore. That someone else could take the bid. They didn't argue. A week later, I got a manila envelope in the mail, no return address. Inside was the photo, the one I'd left behind. Only now, the family wasn't facing the camera. Their heads were turned, all of them looking at the wall behind them. At something, someone emerging from it. I don't go near that ridge anymore. Not for work, not for curiosity, but sometimes, in half sleep, I still see that arm. Still feel the weight of it pointing toward the past, not to accuse, not to warn, just to remind I came to the cabin to paint, but most days I didn't touch the brush. They said it was built in 1902, a timber frame retreat, once used by traveling ministers and later abandoned when the hill road washed out. The restoration group had stabilized the structure new roof, sealed foundation, but the rest was left untouched. I rented it cheap, promising to be quiet and careful, and in return I got solitude, wood smoke, and the kind of silence that presses in from all directions. I was 37, recently untethered, divorced, drifting, and searching for something that would let me breathe again. The cabin was meant to be stillness, a canvas. But the stillness came with a scent. It started faint. On the second night, wet cedar and something behind it. The smell of damp hair. Not mildew, not rot. Just the unmistakable odor of hair left too long in cold water. It came suddenly, without warning, and vanished just as fast. The first few times I chalked it up to old walls in my imagination. But by the fifth time, I noticed a pattern. The scent only came when I turned away from the corner by the hearth. I'd walk past the old wooden chair, turn my back, and there it was, hair, damp and burnt, the kind of scent you never forget once it clings to your throat. One morning, I found something folded beneath that chair. A fox fur stole, worn and brittle, the lining stitched with a name I didn't recognize, Lady Caro. The scent was strongest when I touched it. That night I burned it behind the cabin. Flames took fast, curling the fur inward like it was trying to pull back into itself. I stayed out there until it was ash. The smell was gone for a day. Then it returned thicker, more insistent. Now the air near the chair felt humid, like breath caught between two mouths. I started noticing other changes. A blanket that I had folded would be left draped over the rocker. A teacup I hadn't unpacked sat on the windowsill, steaming. The house never felt hostile, only expectant, like it had been waiting for someone like me to settle in and pick up where another had stopped. I tried painting through it. I chose darker colors. The lines on the canvas began to echo the shape of the chair, the curve of the hearth, the slope of a head bent forward. I painted without looking, and when I stepped back, I realized the face I'd captured was my own, only older, sharper, and soaked to the roots. I didn't remember painting the eyes, but they stared back like they'd been watching for years. That night, the scent filled the cabin. I lit a fire, but it didn't warm the room. I reached for my old leather sketchbook, flipped through the pages, and found one I hadn't drawn. It was a charcoal study of the fox fur stole, perfectly rendered, every stitch and shadow in place. But the name was different this time. My initials were stitched into the lining, beneath it, in fine print. Someone had written, "If the smoke won't take it, it stays." I packed to leave that night. No goodbyes, just clothes, my gear. The canvas rolled tight, but as I opened the front door, the scent hit me again, sharper, angrier, like burnt bone. I turned, just once, and saw the chair gently rocking on its own. The fox fur stole lay draped across the back, unburned, whole. I didn't stay. I drove until I reached Asheville. Spent the night in a motel with too many lights. My clothes reeked of cedar and something deeper. Weeks later, I received a package at my studio. No note. Inside was the canvas I thought I'd left behind, the painting of the face. The eyes had changed. Now they were closed. I stored the canvas in the basement. covered it with a drop cloth, and told myself not to think about it. But I did. Every night. I'd find myself halfway down the stairs without remembering why I'd gotten up. I'd stare at the cloth and feel the weight behind it, like the face was still watching one through closed eyes. I never lifted it again. I should have thrown it out. I didn't. Something about destroying it felt wrong, like I'd be finishing a task that wasn't mine to begin with. 3 weeks later, I started smelling the cabin again. Not just a memory, the actual scent. Damp hair, cold cedar, the burn beneath it. I checked the windows, the vents, nothing, no leaks, no signs of mold. The smell would come and go stronger on rainy nights or when I painted alone. At first, I blamed my brushes, my solvents, even my own clothes, but it wasn't anything I could touch. It was the cabin, somehow carried back with me, slow and patient. Then came the dreams. Always the same, I'm back in that single room. Night thick against the windows. Fire barely breathing in the hearth. The chair is there, just like before. But I'm the one sitting in it. I'm older, hunched, and holding the fox fur stole across my lap like a shroud. I rock once. And then someone steps into the room, someone younger, someone new. And I lift my hand to point. Every time. I wake up with my arm outstretched, stiff and aching, like I'd been holding it there all night. I stopped painting. I stopped sleeping. People asked if I was okay. I said I was. But something had taken root in me, soft, slow, and not mine. One night, I woke up with the basement door open. No wind, no intruder, just open. The cloth had shifted. One edge of the canvas showed, and in the thin line of moonlight coming through the basement window, I could see the eyes again. Open, watching. Not afraid, not angry, just waiting. That morning, I made a decision. I didn't burn it. I didn't throw it away. I drove back to the hills, back to Waynesville. The trust still held the lease on the cabin, but no one had stayed there since me. The caretaker met me at the trailhead, said nothing, just handed me the key with a glance like he already knew. I placed the canvas in the center of the cabin, unrolled it, leaned it against the hearth. I set the fox fur stole across the chair, where it belonged. And then I lit a fire. This time, the room didn't stay cold. The scent rose slow and full, like breath exhaled after holding still too long. I didn't speak. I just waited. And somewhere, beyond the wood and stone, something settled. They sent me out there to stabilize the back wall and update the floor plan. But the measurements never added up. From the outside, the cabin looked simple square structure, pitched roof, chimney flush against the east side. But the moment I stepped in, I noticed something was off. I paced the interior twice, running the laser level and sketching the rough frame. But every time I marked where the western wall should be, I came up short, by nearly a foot. I recalibrated the tools, chalked new lines, checked the angles. Same result. Like the back left corner had swallowed space without anyone noticing. It wasn't a huge gap, just enough to bother me. Just enough to feel wrong. There was supposed to be a small window on the west wall. I'd seen it on the original blueprints and again in the online listing photo. A simple square cut, 4-pane, framed in pine. But inside, nothing. No opening, no light, no trace of where the trim should have been. I circled the exterior to check. From the outside, it was still there, perfectly intact. A window with no glass, just an empty black square. I tapped on the wood beneath it, expecting to hear hollow space. Instead, it sounded solid, like the wall had been filled in from the inside, buried behind layers of wood that weren't meant to be touched. That night, I stayed in the cabin to avoid another hour's drive back to town. I kept the lantern low, camp stove humming, the plan spread across the floor. Around midnight, I heard the sound soft creaking from the west wall, like old hinges easing open. I turned slowly. Nothing moved, but the air around that wall felt tighter, like pressure had built inside the room and hadn't found a way out. I walked over and knocked, just once. The wood was cold, damp, and when I pressed my palm flat, I felt something shift, not behind the wall, but inside it. The next morning, I climbed a ladder and removed the exterior frame of the west window. I expected to find studs, maybe old insulation, or remnants of some haphazard repair, but there was nothing behind it. No void, no wall, just a flat, black surface smooth like glass, but not reflective. I reached in with a screwdriver, tapped. It didn't echo. It absorbed the sound, like it was pulling noise inward. I backed down the ladder and stepped away. The black surface stayed there, pulsing faintly in the light, like a shallow breath. That evening, the compass started acting up. I wasn't even using it for anything. Just happened to glance down. The needle spun slow, wide arcs, never settling. I laid it on the floor to test for interference. But it pointed not north, not magnetic, but toward me. I picked it up. It followed, every time I moved. The needle reoriented to my chest. I left it on the porch and locked the door. Sometime before dawn, I woke to find the cabin colder than before. The fire had died, but the air felt hollow, like something had moved through the room and taken the warmth with it. I sat up and turned my flashlight toward the west wall. The space where the window should have been, where the black surface had pulsed, now showed wood again. But it was different. The grain ran upward, against the rest of the cabin's boards. And one knot in the center looked open, too round, like an eye without a lid. I stared at it, then it blinked. I didn't move. I don't even think I breathed. The knot closed slowly, like a lid pulling down over something that had never been meant to look back. I sat there on the edge of my cot, flashlight dimming, hand frozen midair. Part of me wanted to believe I'd imagined it, that I'd misread the shape in the dark, mistaken a trick of grain and shadow for something worse. But even after it closed, I could still feel it, the weight of being seen. A direction in the room where all air seemed to fall. At sunrise, I took measurements again. This time, the room was smaller. I don't mean slightly off, I mean the physical interior had shifted. The floorboard seams had compressed. The walls bowed inward just enough to notice, just enough to push my tools a few inches off from yesterday's marks. The compass was still on the porch, but now the needle didn't spin. It was perfectly still, pointing straight at the cabin, no matter how I turned the casing. I went back inside and checked the west wall. The grain was normal again. The knot was just wood. I wanted to leave. I nearly did. But I told myself I'd finish what I came to do one more night, one more sketch, and I'd report the anomalies as foundational instability, maybe subsidence from the slope. I sealed the door that evening, bolted it with a latch from the inside, and shoved my pack against the frame. It was an old trick from fieldwork: give yourself at least 3 seconds of noise before someone gets in. I sat in the middle of the room with the floor plans, drawing by headlamp, refusing to look toward the wall. Around 2:00 a.m., the smell hit: old dust, pine sap, and something like wet soil, the kind that seeps up when you dig somewhere the earth doesn't want disturbed. Then came the tapping. Not on the door, on the wall. 4 slow taps, a pause, then 4 more. The kind of rhythm that carries meaning you don't want to understand. I crawled across the floor and put my ear to the paneling, behind the wood. I heard breathing, not gasping, not panting, just the steady, patient breath of something that didn't need to sleep. I backed away, tripped over my own gear, and knocked the headlamp sideways. In the split second of darkness, I felt the air shift. When the light returned, the compass was sitting at my feet. Open, needle gone, in its place, a single piece of paper, folded tight, stained at the edges, with one word written in narrow pencil script: return. I left at first light. No breakfast, no cleanup. I drove down the hill without stopping, without checking the rearview mirror. Even when I thought I saw something move in it. I filed the paperwork that week and never mentioned the wall, never explained why I left the plans incomplete. I don't go near Monroe County anymore. But 2 nights ago, I found something tucked in the back pocket of my tool bag. A square of glass, 4-pane, pine-framed. And behind it, just barely visible through the reflection, was an eye, already open. I only came to the cabin because I needed quiet. Not peace, not healing. Just the kind of silence that doesn't ask questions. I'd grown up in church halls and revival tents, born into a rhythm of forced salvation and clean hands. As soon as I could drive, I left it behind, but it never quite left me. The man who owned the cabin was a friend of my uncle's. Said I could stay as long as I wanted. It sat on a low ridge, surrounded by leafless oaks, facing east like it was built to listen for something. There was no signal, no electricity, just a cot, a stove, and time. The first night passed without incident. Cold creaked in the beams, and wind pressed against the windows like something slow and indecisive. I sat up late, reading an old paperback by headlamp, trying not to think about anything. But just before sleep, I thought I heard music, soft, broken notes, like a melody someone had forgotten how to finish. No lyrics, just hums. I told myself it was wind through the slats, or some animal groaning in its sleep. But it came again the next night. Clearer this time. A pattern. A hymn I hadn't heard in years. It came from the floor. I pulled back the rug in the center of the room, checked the seams. The boards were tight, aged but solid. No trapdoor, no vents, just wood. But the sound came again the moment I turned my back, a low hum, like a child singing from beneath the planks. I dropped to my knees, pressed my ear to the boards, and listened. The voice wasn't sharp, wasn't sweet. It was dry, tired, as though it had been repeating the same tune long enough to forget why. On the third night, I found the Bible. It was tucked behind a beam above the hearth, wrapped in a faded handkerchief. Most of the pages were warped, swollen with time. The Psalms were scribbled through in pencil, lines blacked out with urgency. Only the last page remained untouched, corners sharp, paper still white. Someone had written a name at the bottom, mine. Not initials, my full name. The handwriting wasn't familiar, but it tilted the same way mine did, with the tail of the hooking a little too far left. I wanted to leave, but the road was mud from 3 days of rain, and the slope down to the main path had started to slide. I told myself I'd wait until morning, one more night, and then I'd be gone. But the hymn returned just after midnight. This time, it was closer inside the cabin, not from below, but from the walls. The melody rose slowly, filling the space with something that wasn't warmth, but memory. I knew the tune. My mother used to sing it under her breath while washing dishes, always stopping just before the final verse. I stood still. Heart nodded. The stove had gone out, but I hadn't heard it die. The cot was pulled half from the wall, though I hadn't moved it. And sitting on top of my pack, as though gently placed, was the Bible, closed, the handkerchief folded beneath it. I picked it up, and something sharp caught my finger, a sliver of paper stuck between the back pages. It wasn't part of the book. It was torn from a letter. It read, "If you sing it back, she'll know." I didn't sleep. The rain eased by morning, but the fog clung low and yellow around the cabin like breath that wouldn't lift. I packed in silence, kept my head down, moved slow. I didn't touch the Bible again. I didn't need to. That tune, I'd carried it with me since I was 6. It had always lived under my memory like something folded too tight to flatten. Now it was rising again, without my permission, without breath. I heard it in my thoughts as I rolled up the bedding, felt it coil in my chest when I turned the door latch. The melody ended short every time, always skipping the last 4 notes. The slope held as I eased down in low gear, tires slipping once near the bottom, but I didn't stop. I reached the main road by noon, drove until the trees thinned and the clouds stopped following me. But that night, in the motel outside Crossville, the hum started again, through the walls, through the vent, the same half melody. I turned on the TV, the fan, even ran the shower just to drown it out. But the pitch threaded between everything, thin, dry, insistent. The next morning, I checked out early. In the parking lot, I found a small envelope wedged beneath my windshield wiper. Inside was a clipping newsprint, yellowed, a photo of the cabin, burned down to its stone hearth. The article was dated July 1987. A fire had taken it in the middle of the night. No known cause. The name of the woman who died in it was familiar. Too familiar. Her initials were carved into the front page of the Bible. The one now sitting in the back seat of my car. I hadn't packed it. I hadn't touched it since that last night. I tried throwing it out. First in a dumpster behind a diner, then in a fire pit behind a campground 2 states away. But it returned, always tucked somewhere near my bed, the pages curling more each time. One night, the hum started before I even turned off the light. I sat up, clutching my knees, and whispered the final line of the hymn, the line no one ever sang. The cabin had burned with her still inside. The story said she was a music teacher, said she died humming. That night, the voice hummed back. It wasn't distant anymore. It came from the corner of the room, where shadow folded in too tightly, where air never moved. I didn't look. I just listened. And for the first time, it finished the song. Every note. Then silence fell so sudden I thought I'd gone deaf. I've tried moving 3 times since then. New town, new job, no records, no church bells. But every place I go, The hymn finds me. It waits until the third night, always. And the Bible tattered now, soft as cloth never stays packed. I don't sing anymore. I don't hum. I don't speak to strangers. But some nights, just before sleep, I find myself mouthing the words I was never taught. If you sing it back, she'll know. And she does. I kept thinking it was just habit that I'd left the stove warm, or forgot to blow out the lantern. But it wasn't that. Every morning, the fire in the hearth burned low but steady, glowing like someone had fed it through the night. I lived alone, no animals, no tricks. The cabin had no power, no automatic systems, nothing to explain the constant heat. It wasn't comforting. It felt watched, as though warmth wasn't for me, but for something already present. I tried staying awake one night to catch it, drifted off around 3. When I woke, the fire was higher than I'd left it. On that Sace, the 4th morning, I found a coffee steaming in a mug I hadn't touched, the same brand I used, same chipped rim, but I hadn't brewed any. My percolator was cold, bone dry, sitting exactly where I'd left it the night before. I carried the cup outside and poured it into the snow. The scent lingered familiar but off, like something pretending to be coffee. That day, I searched the entire cabin for signs of entry footprints, drag marks, anything. Nothing. Not even dust displaced on the sill. Later, I noticed the clock, an old wind-up thing over the hearth. It had never worked, or so I thought. But now it ticked steadily, its hands frozen at 7:02. The strange thing, the fire always flared slightly around that time, even when I let it burn out, even when I sat there. Watching it die at 7:02, the flame would shiver, rise, and settle. I stopped winding the clock, but it kept ticking. Always toward 7:02, always resetting when I left the room. That night, I dreamt of someone moving through the kitchen, not walking, gliding. I couldn't see their face, just long hair, wet at the ends, and hands cupped around something that shimmered like coal. I woke to find the front door open a crack, snow undisturbed across the threshold, and there, on the table, was the mug again, still warm, still untouched. I took it to the creek and let the current take it, watched the ceramic disappear into the current, swallowed in seconds. I turned to walk back and it was waiting on the porch. I didn't run. I didn't even panic. I just stopped sleeping. I stayed up 4 nights in a row, watching, documenting, measuring the logs, the heat, the ticks of the clock. Always the same. At 7:02, something shifted. Not the flame, not the air, but the room itself. The grain in the floorboards twitched. The window fogged over in reverse, like breath pulled in instead of pushed out. The shadows didn't stretch, they turned. I left the next morning, packed light, told myself I'd come back with friends, with gear, with something more than questions. But I never did. Weeks passed. Then a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid. My cabin, the fire roaring, and through the window, a figure. Not me. I tried to convince myself the photo was a prank, maybe someone from the trust, or a bored local. But the angle was wrong. It had been taken from the north side of the cabin, a slope so steep it couldn't support weight. I remembered standing there once, boots sliding in the wet moss, nearly falling backward. No one could have held a camera steady long enough to frame that shot. And the figure, it wasn't a trick of shadow. The outline was too clear. Someone inside, shoulders turned, face just out of sight, standing exactly where I had stood each morning, staring out as if waiting for something to come back. I burned the photo, though the edges curled slow and reluctant. It didn't blacken like normal paper. It paled, turned to ash the color of bone. That night, I dreamed of the fire again. This time, I stood outside the cabin, watching it through the window. I saw myself seated inside, only it wasn't really me. The posture was off, the tilt of the head, too still. Then the clock chimed from within. Though it never had before, a single note, soft and final. When I woke, the scent of smoke was in my clothes. I drove back 2 weeks later, against every instinct. The road was worse than I remembered. Washed out in 2 places, strewn with branches. No tire tracks but mine. The cabin stood untouched, just as I'd left it, but colder. The fire was out. For the first time since I'd arrived weeks ago. The hearth was empty. No embers, no warmth, just blackened stone and cold ash. The mug was gone. So was the clock. In the back room, I found a new chair, an old rocking frame with deep wear on the arms. I hadn't placed it there. I hadn't seen it before. But there it was, settled near the rear wall, facing the dark window that looked toward nothing. I stepped closer and felt the floor warm beneath me, faint and rising. I backed away. I left the cabin again without sleeping, drove until my fingers stopped shaking, until the air felt thin and neutral. Weeks passed. Then a second envelope came. Inside, a page torn from a journal. Not mine, not in my handwriting. It read, "I tried to leave, but the fire needs someone." It always has. The paper smelled like ash and pine. I've changed numbers, moved states. I don't tell people about the cabin anymore. But each winter, just after the first frost, I wake up at 7:02 a.m. without an alarm. My apartment is warm, always warmer than it should be, and sometimes, just before sunrise, I smell coffee on the air. I brought the mirror with me because I thought it would make the videos look better, just a simple prop, something to bounce light in my shots. I film slow-living vlogs, forest walks, cabin breakfasts, that sort of thing. I thought the antique glass, with its faded bronze frame and warped surface, would lend a kind of worn elegance to the space. It had belonged to my grandmother, and I'd never used it before. It stayed covered in my studio until I packed it for this trip 1 week alone, in a century-old cabin with no power and no distractions. Just me, a camera, and the silence I thought I needed. The cabin was set deep into the trees, beyond even the gravel access road, and took nearly an hour's hike to reach. It was perfect. Tight log seams, creaky floors, and a wood stove that made the whole place smell like pine and smoke. I hung the mirror opposite the small writing desk, where it would catch the light of the window and warm the frame of the shots. I didn't notice anything strange that first day. The footage looked a little darker than usual, but I chalked that up to weather. It had rained just before I arrived, and the forest held its breath in damp silence. The second night, I caught it during editing, just a flicker in the footage. My reflection was delayed. Half a second off, not a full lag, not digital, but something in the mirror itself. I'd lift my hand to scratch my head. And in the mirror, the motion would finish just a blink too late. I thought it was a rendering issue. Maybe moisture had gotten into the lens. But when I tested it with my phone, the lag was still there, subtle but present. Only in the mirror, only when I wasn't looking directly into it. I stopped filming for a day and just observed. Sat in the cabin, lights off, watching the mirror in silence. I began to notice other things. When I crossed the room and turned my back, the light in the glass shifted like someone had moved inside the reflection. Not the light behind me, but within the mirror's own space. I set up a second camera, angled toward it, and left it recording overnight. In the morning, the battery was drained. The footage ended at 3:12 a.m. The last frame before it cut out showed someone exactly my height standing beside the desk, hands at their sides. But I had been asleep in bed. I covered the mirror. I thought that would be enough. But the next night, I woke up to the blanket draped over it, folded neatly on the floor. The glass was bare again. The mirror seemed clearer than ever, like the glass had been scrubbed down to perfect sheen. But the reflection wasn't my cabin. It looked like mine. Mostly, same walls, same desk, but the light was different. Warmer, like the fire had been lit, even though mine had gone out hours earlier. And the reflection didn't show me, it showed the back of someone's head, seated at the desk, facing the mirror. I packed the mirror up the next morning, wrapped it tight, hiked it back out to the car, and locked it in the trunk. I told myself I'd drop it at the thrift store on the way home. But when I returned to the cabin that evening, the mirror was there, hanging exactly where I'd first placed it. I opened the trunk empty. The cloth I had wrapped it in sat crumpled on the passenger seat. I didn't sleep that night. Just waited for the reflection to change again. Around 2:00 a.m., the image inside the mirror flickered, and my figure stood. It didn't face me. It turned and walked to the edge of the frame, disappearing into a darkness the real cabin didn't have. And then I saw myself, the real me, still frozen on the cot, watching a version of myself leave the reflection behind. I left the cabin before sunrise, drove straight through to Asheville. Mirror still locked in the trunk. I haven't opened it since. But sometimes when I pass a window or glance at polished glass, I see it again, my reflection, just half a breath behind, smiling when I'm not. ChatGPT said I've kept the mirror in storage ever since wrapped in canvas, sealed in a crate, tucked behind old paintings and equipment I no longer use. I moved twice, switched studios, changed my habits, but it's still with me. I don't open the crate. I don't touch the canvas. And yet, things happen. I'll walk past a polished kettle and see something else in the corner of the reflection. A sliver of forest, the old desk, that warm, low light from the cabin that shouldn't follow me here. For a while, I convinced myself it was residual memory, just echoes. But then the footage changed. I was cataloging my archived clips, organizing them by date, when I noticed something off. A file from a week before the trip. Me, talking into the camera, recording my packing list. But in the background, inside a small square of reflected glass, the mirror was already hanging in the cabin, already showing that wrong light. That was days before I even arrived. Days before I set foot in the woods. I called a friend in video forensics, someone who owed me a favor. He ran the clip through software, no signs of tampering, no data corruption, His advice was polite but uneasy. "You probably just edited over an old file. Memory tricks happen." But he said something else before he hung up. Said he watched the clip 3 times and the reflection never blinked. Not once, even when I did. I started seeing myself places I hadn't been. A tagged photo from someone's hike showed me standing far off on a trail in Pisgah, blurry and pale. Same jacket I wore in the cabin. A message from a stranger thanked me for the campfire story I'd told on YouTube, but I never uploaded any story from that trip. I scoured my account. Nothing. No drafts, no deleted files. But the video exists. Others have seen it. They describe me sitting at the old desk, telling a tale about mirrors and shadows and how sometimes your reflection walks away before you do. I haven't filmed anything in over a year. The cameras stay off. The lenses are all covered. But it hasn't stopped. I see myself everywhere. In elevator doors, in turned-off screens, in water that should ripple but holds still instead. The worst is the bathroom mirror. I keep it draped in a towel. But sometimes I forget. Sometimes I catch my reflection still staring even after I've turned away. And now there's something else. Last night, the crate was open, the canvas unwrapped, the mirror propped against the far wall of my studio, angled so I'd see it the moment I walked in. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched as my reflection slowly lifted its hand and placed its palm flat against the inside of the glass. My hand never moved. It was a detail I nearly missed on my first night there. The lamp, just a simple oil burner with a brass stem and frosted glass shade, stood on the small table beside the bed, aligned perfectly with the far wall. It didn't catch my eye at first because everything in the cabin was neat, almost too neat. But when I reached to move it closer to the chair by the window, the base wouldn't budge, not stuck anchored. I figured it was just some trick of old varnish or humidity, and I didn't press it. But in the morning, the lamp was sitting in a different spot, still on the same table, but now shifted slightly exactly 1 inch clockwise. I didn't think much of it until it happened again the next night. I returned from a short hike to find it rotated another inch. No marks, no sounds, just that quiet adjustment, like it had somewhere it wanted to face. I checked the base, no screws, no mechanism, just brass and wood. I tried moving it again. This time it slid easily. Too easily. I pushed it back to where it had been originally. That night, the cabin creaked more than usual. On the 4th night, I left the lamp exactly where I found it. But I placed a piece of twine around the base, tying it loosely to the table leg. In the morning, the twine was unknotted, laid in a neat coil beside the lamp, which had turned again. This time, it faced directly toward the cabin's small entryway. That was the first time I felt it a quiet, patient pressure in the room. Not hostile, not cold, just present. Like I'd nudged a pattern that didn't want to be broken. I started keeping a journal of the lamp's movements. Every night, it rotated precisely 15 degrees clockwise. And every morning, I found it aligned toward a different part of the cabin. It moved in a slow arc, as if it were scanning, watching, when it finally faced the bed. I didn't sleep. I turned it away gently, without tying it this time. But by morning, it had snapped back, no rotation, no trail, just suddenly back where it wanted to be. Then came the noise. Around 2:17 a.m., not 2:15, not 2:20, the cabin would groan in a strange rhythm, almost like a slow breath. I checked the supports, the wind outside. Even the pressure in the stove flew. Everything was still. But the lamp flared slightly at that moment. A flicker that didn't come from the oil wick. It didn't cast light the way fire should. It pulsed. That night, I woke up with my mouth open and no sound coming out. Like I'd been trying to speak in a dream. The lamp glowed steadily, brighter than it had all week. And on the wall behind it, cast by nothing I could see, was the faint shadow of a second lamp taller, wider, and shaped like something made to watch, not to light. I didn't stay after that. I left the lamp where it was, packed before the sun rose, and walked the trail out with my breath tight and shallow. I told myself I'd imagined most of it, that the movement was subtle, that shadows play tricks in old cabins. But when I got home, my phone buzzed with a low storage warning. The camera roll was full. Every image the same, the lamp, centered and glowing. As if something had taken 100 silent portraits of it while I slept. I should have deleted the photos immediately, but I didn't. I went through them one by one. The timestamps were irregular, some were minutes apart, others hours, but what caught me wasn't when they were taken. It was what changed between them. In the first few, the lamp sat alone. Same angle, same dull brass glow. But by photo 20 or so, faint shadows began to appear behind it. At first, just lines, indistinct and small. Then curves. Then what looked like the edge of a hand. By the last set of images, the shadow was no longer behind the lamp. It stood beside it, the outline clear, now tall, head tilted forward slightly, like someone peering down at the flame with quiet reverence. No face, no detail, just absence shaped like a person. In the final image, the lamp's glow had dimmed, almost completely swallowed in the dark, and the figure leaned closer, as if whispering into the wick. I deleted the photos then, or thought I did. But they returned the next morning, same images, same order, except now. The last photo was different. The lamp was gone. The figure faced the camera. I started keeping lights on in every room of my apartment, avoided mirrors, refused to sleep if I hadn't triple-checked the closet. But the glow still came. Not warm, not golden, just a dull pressure in the eyes, like staring at a flame too long in a room where it shouldn't exist. One night I woke to find my bedside lamp flickering. It wasn't oil. It wasn't even on. But the bulb pulsed once, steady, and I smelled something sharp brass and soot, like the inside of that old cabin's chimney. I tried to find the records, anything about that lamp, the cabin, who'd lived there before. The trust gave me little. Cabin B, no historical record, early 1900 structure. But someone else had checked it out the year before me. A woman. Her name wasn't on any lease. But I found a note in the margin of the registry, returned key. Did not stay. Claimed object in room, interfered with sleep. I tracked her down through the booking email. She never replied. Her obituary came out 3 months later. No known cause of death, found in bed, eyes open, hands clasped around what the article called an antique lantern, though no one could describe where it came from. That was when I boxed up every light source I didn't need. When I started using only overheads. I don't own candles. I don't use dimmers. But a few nights ago, during a storm, the power went out. I lit a match, just one, just for a moment to find the breaker. And in the flare so fast I nearly missed it, I saw the lamp on my kitchen table. Not a trick, not a copy. The lamp. Same chipped base, same brass stem, The glass pulsed with light that didn't cast a shadow. It was gone when I looked back. But the table was warm, and my phone had taken another photo without me touching it. The lamp, watching. From the start, the altitude didn't match. The map said the cabin sat just over 4,800 feet, but my altimeter read higher, 5,200, sometimes even 5,400 depending on the hour. I figured it was a barometric glitch or a calibration issue with my gear. But my GPS disagreed too. Coordinates were stable, but elevation ticked up and down like the cabin itself was shifting. It didn't make sense. But the cabin stood where it was supposed to be. Small, remote, tucked against a slope, built sometime in the 1930s by surveyors who never finished the road they started. A friend let me borrow it for writing. Said it was good for clearing the head. It wasn't the kind of place where you heard things, no traffic, no trails, just wind and the sound of snow melting in patches. Still, that first night, something felt off. It wasn't fear. It was displacement. Like the angles of the room weren't true. I'd stand, walk, then sit again, and my body would lag a second behind, as if I'd already moved and was just catching up. I chalked it up to elevation sickness, or the weird pressure system that had rolled in with the clouds. The real problem started with the clock. Not the one I brought. The one already in the cabin. Old, pendulum-driven, mounted above the door. It wasn't working hands frozen at 6:41, but it ticked anyway. No swing, no shift. Just a hollow wooden talk that came every minute and a half. I tried removing the battery, then realized it didn't have one. The mechanism was rusted, inert, but the sound continued, soft and steady, even when I took it off the wall and set it face down under the bed. By the second night, the altitude had increased another 100 feet, and my phone stopped recognizing my location. Not no service, it just said undefined. The barometric pressure dropped fast, enough to make my ears pop indoors. That's when the door creaked open without wind. Just 2 inches, enough to change the temperature of the room, enough to make me stand and stare at nothing. I locked it, placed a chair under the knob, checked the window latches. I barely slept. But sometime before dawn, I felt a weight shift in the cabin, like the ground beneath the floorboards had heaved once, very gently, and everything inside had adjusted half an inch. The clock ticked again louder. I looked over. The hands had moved. Now it read 6:40. 1 minute earlier, I didn't touch the clock again. I left it face down under the bed. But each morning, it reappeared above the doorframe, perfectly centered. The hands crept backward slow, precise, 1 minute lost per day. On the third day, it showed 6:37. That was the same morning I woke up with a nosebleed, which I hadn't had since I was a kid. My ears rang for hours. I couldn't keep anything down. It felt like the air in the cabin was growing thinner, even though I hadn't moved an inch. By now, the GPS wouldn't even load. The altimeter needle had maxed out and was trembling just above its top mark. I opened the door at sunrise and saw frost clinging to trees that shouldn't have been there taller. Straighter, dark pine trunks that hadn't lined the trail in. I turned around, and the view was different, as if the ridgeline had bent, reshaped itself in the night. I considered leaving then. I even strapped on my pack. But something about stepping past the doorframe made my legs lock. like gravity had changed direction just slightly. And my body couldn't understand how to move. That night, the stars were wrong. I sat by the window with my notebook, trying to map constellations to calm myself. But they were scattered, smeared like someone had brushed them with their hand. No Orion, no Polaris, just glints and smears of unfamiliar light. I closed the shutters, lit a candle, and tried to focus. But even inside, the pressure grew. My thoughts blurred. Time dragged and skipped in strange ways, long stretches of silence interrupted by jerking flashes of memory. I'd blink and my candle would be burned halfway down. Blink again and it would be whole. The shadows moved the wrong way. Sometime deep in the night, I looked up and saw my own handwriting on the wall. Not scribbled, etched, precise. A single line, repeated 3 times above the door frame. If the clock strikes 0, it will not stop. I never wrote that. I hadn't brought anything sharp enough to carve wood. But there it was, fresh, clean, as though it had just been finished. I stared at it until the cabin ticked again. The clock now read 6:30. I didn't sleep. By morning, the windows showed nothing, just pale white, as if the cabin were suspended in fog or snowfall. But there was no moisture, no cold, just blankness that stretched past the glass like a sky without a sun. I opened the door, reached a hand out and felt nothing. No wind, no pressure, no resistance, just space. I slammed it shut and wedged the desk in front. The floor creaked in protest, like the whole cabin had flexed. The clock struck 6:29. I'm writing this on the last page of my notebook. The ticking is louder now. The hands will reach 0 soon. I don't know what happens then. Maybe nothing. Maybe this place finally finishes slipping loose. But the air is thin, and the light inside grows strange. If you find this, if you find the cabin, don't check the altitude. Don't touch the clock. And above all, don't wait to see what happens when it runs out. It wasn't the first time I'd slept in a place I wasn't supposed to. Comes with the job. Mapping trails most people forgot how to follow. The rain had turned fast fat, slapping drops that blurred my topo scanner and soaked the pages of my notebook. I was 3 miles past the last marked trailhead when I found the cabin, half buried in rockfall and overgrown laurel. A ranger stopover, probably from the 50s, with warped beams and a rust-stained roof that still funneled water clean off the side. The lock on the door was rusted through. I didn't break in. The door opened like it had been waiting. The inside was dry, mostly. A few dead bees on the sill, dust on the lantern hooks. But the furniture was intact. 1 bed frame with a coiled spring, 1 wood stove, long since gone cold, and a desk in the corner with a guest ledger left open, an actual logbook, thick with yellowed pages. Most cabins like this don't keep those anymore, not since the ranger stations consolidated. But there it was, untouched, a fountain pen resting in the middle crease. I flipped through the pages out of boredom. The entries went back decades. Most were short initials, trail name, weather notes. But then the dates started running together. 1 every day. Different names, new handwriting. No weather, no detail, just a time, a name, and sometimes a warning. The strangest part was the ink. It looked fresh. Not all of it. Some had faded, but the last 20 pages were sharp, like they'd been written that week. I ran my finger over one. The page didn't smear, but the pen next to it had a wet sheen. I picked it up, checked for tricks. Real ink, old, but flowing. I checked the last entry. July 22nd, A. Doyle, 4:03 p.m. I stared at it for a long time. That was my name. Avery Doyle. And the time matched exactly when I walked through the door. I hadn't written it. I told myself it was a joke. Maybe someone at the mapping office had been here before, signed it that way for fun. But my signature, it was exact. Down to the odd loop in the Y I started doing last winter. The pen fell from my hand and rolled toward the edge of the desk. I left it there, walked a slow circuit around the cabin. No signs of recent presence, no fresh tracks, no heat in the stove. But the air felt held like breath waiting in a throat. I didn't leave. I told myself the rain was still too heavy. I set my pack by the door and tried to settle. Laid out my maps, dried my tools by the stove. I even managed to eat something. But my eyes kept drifting to the desk. The ledger sat closed now. I hadn't closed it. I crossed the room, opened it again. A new entry, July 22nd. Guest confirmed. 9:00 p.m. I checked my watch. It was 8:59. The knock came right on time. 3 slow raps on the cabin door. Firm, measured, like the knuckles of someone who'd been here before. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knock came again, same rhythm. A minute later, I crossed the floor in the dark and peeked out through the slats in the shutter. Nothing but trees and falling rain. But the pressure in the room had changed. The floor felt heavier beneath me, and the clock on the wall cracked. Battery long dead had begun to tick. I didn't open the door. I shoved the desk in front of it, dragged the cot across for good measure, and sat with my back to the wall. Sleep didn't come easy. I watched the hours crawl past. And with each one, the air grew drier. Still, like whatever had knocked was still standing outside, waiting for something more than entry. At dawn, the desk had moved. Not much, just a few inches from the door, as if nudged politely back into place. The ledger sat open to a fresh page, and this time, it didn't say my name. It said guest departed. Ledger continues. I stayed longer than I should have. That much is clear to me now. The rain passed by noon, but I didn't leave. Something about the ledger, about seeing my name written before I ever touched the pen, made the trail outside feel further than it was. I kept telling myself I needed to check the ridge one more time before heading out. But I never packed. Instead, I sat at the desk, watching the way the light moved across the page. The ink shimmered ever so slightly, as if still wet. It shouldn't have. It had been hours. I tried tearing the page out, but the paper wouldn't rip. It folded. It bent. But the fibers held tight like hide. I even tried burning one corner with a match from my emergency kit. The flame curled away like the page exhaled against it. That's when I started flipping back, way back. The earliest pages were brittle but intact. I found entries dated 1951, all the way through 1978 with long gaps. Then none at all for nearly 2 decades. And then, starting in 2001, a steady stream of names returned. One a day, no skips. Some were legible, others not. A few just initials and timestamps, never a full message. Never a goodbye. The clock on the wall ticked again. I turned slowly toward it. It had no hands, just a blank white face and that dry, hollow talk every 60 seconds. Louder now than when I arrived. I didn't like that I hadn't noticed the missing hands before. didn't like the feeling that something had been measuring my time here long before I sat down. The cot groaned behind me, though I hadn't touched it. When I looked, the pillow was flattened like someone had lain there overnight. My own bedroll remained packed near the door. I decided to leave. I forced myself to. I packed everything, grabbed my maps, and opened the door. And the forest wasn't right. The path looked familiar, but somehow older. Trees too thick, stones where I hadn't seen them before. I stepped out anyway and began walking, using my compass and GPS. But both kept circling, pointing me back toward the cabin. At one point, I stopped, turned a full circle, and realized I could see the cabin from every direction, no matter which way I faced. Always just through the trees, always just close enough to touch my nerves. I ran, or tried to. My legs moved. But the trail didn't change. I passed the same fallen log 4 times. Once, I marked it with a red line of chalk, then passed it again with the mark already faded. Eventually, the trail vanished altogether. Not overgrown, just gone, swallowed into moss and mud. When I turned back, the cabin door was already open. Inside, the ledger had turned another page. My name again. This time in someone else's hand. And below it, written in small, deliberate script, "Stop trying to leave. You've already stayed." I don't remember lying down, but I remember waking up. Same room, same light, same hour. The only change was the date. The ledger said July 23rd now. No other entries, just mine. I tried leaving 3 more times. Each time, the trail folded back, the forest blurred, and the cabin greeted me like I'd only stepped outside for air. Now I've given up fighting it. I'm still writing. That's all it wants, I think. Pages to fill. Names to echo. I've seen others come through the lost, the broken, the curious. Some last a night. Others fold into the wood like dust. But they all sign the ledger. They always do. If you're reading this, you already have.